I mentioned before the book of Isaiah can be divided into two parts. First 39 chapters is part 1. Then the next 27 chapters is part 2. And part 1 basically it surrounds the two kings, King Ahaz and then King Hezekiah. And King Ahaz is the one that would not trust in the Lord. So when the northern kingdom, like Israel and Syria, they joined together to attack Judah, King Ahaz refused to trust in the Lord. Instead, he rather go pay money to the superpower of that day, Assyria. He believed Assyria would be better off to trust than the Lord. And so he would pay Assyria to attack Israel and Syria, and then he'll be relieved from their attack. And because he refused to believe in the Lord, so Isaiah told him it would lead to some very bad consequences, because not only Assyria would be attacking like Israel, like the northern kingdom, but one day Assyria would also be coming to attack Judah as well. And then many would be exiled, as we read at the end of chapter 8. And these people would only see, like when they were being exiled, they would only see distress and darkness and fearful gloom. And they will be thrust into total utter darkness. And that's what happened when King Ahaz refused to believe in the Lord. And to that gloomy darkness, we come into chapter 9, and the Lord was very graceful. He did not leave like the fate of the Judahites to such gloom like ever. And so chapter 9, verse 1 we read, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. And so that's such a comforting word for the Israelites. Now, it's not because of anything they do. Like, they don't really deserve it. And there's nothing in the Bible that say they deserve the light, the relief from the law. And it's all because we read, like, they will not see gloom anymore. And it's because if we read chapter 9, verse 7, at the end of the verse, it says, it's the seal of the Lord Almighty that will be accomplished this, because like, when they see the light, is of course because of the son or the that will be born to them. This is chapter, that's verse 6. For to us a child is born. So the reason they will see light after the gloom is because of the mercy of the Lord, and it's because God is going to give them a child. And we know that is the promised Messiah. And the giving of the child at the end of verse 7 is really total grace of the Lord. It says, it's the seal of the Lord Almighty that will accomplish this. It's not any merits that the Israelites had on them. Recently, I heard of a story that touched me a lot about the seal of my mother, and I'd like to share with you. Sometimes I listen to a lady who does current event analysis on YouTube. She's, I think, a young lady from mainland China, but she now lives in Canada. And one day she shared in her program about her own self. She says she has, she's a family of 4 siblings, and she's the youngest one. Her mother was a very talented lady and very kind and gentle. However, because she was born in not a right class in China, and we know in China what class you are in was very important. And so she was assigned to a rural residency. And even though she later on married the man who is living in the city, and yet because of the law at that time, the children have to follow the mother's residency. So all the 4 children end up having to go to schools in the rural areas. And her mother was very concerned because there was not much supplies to the rural schools. The education, the teachers were poor, and they didn't have very much resources. And so she tried very, very hard to have the children moved to the city to be with the father for better education. And yet, however hard she tried, it couldn't be done. So one day, as this lady was telling, I think she's only maybe about 40 years old, and she told the audience. So when she was 3 years old, and guess what happened? Because of the zeal of the mother for them to go to the city for better education, for a better future. What happened when she was 3? Her mother committed suicide. And with her death, then all the children could be with the father, and then they could be attending the schools in the city and would have better future. And it's so hard for me to comprehend how can a loving mother commit suicide when she could not even see her children growing up raised by her. But it's the zeal for the betterment of her family, of her children, that she would do something like that. So maybe that help us to touch me more, like on the seal of the Lord for us. Okay, so verse 8. Now, there's some word of the Lord against Jacob, the northern tribe. Okay, chapter 9, verse 8. The Lord has sent a message against Jacob. It will fall on Israel. All the people will know it. Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria will say with pride and arrogance of heart, the bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with dressed stone. The fig trees have been felled, but we will replace them with cedars. But the Lord has strengthened Rezin's foes against them and has turned their enemies on. Arameans from the east and Philistines from the west have destroyed Israel with open mouth. So there's some prophecies regarding the northern tribe. Now the northern tribe, the Lord already said to Ahaz, in about 3 years' time, both the kings of Israel and Syria would be dead. And then in another 10 years, the northern tribe would be fallen. Now these are more detailed words on Israel. And I think the reason it was given here is because it explains more why Israel would be fallen, would be cursed by the Lord. And also, I believe the words are given here as an example to the southern kingdom. Now they see the reason the Jacob or the northern kingdom fall, then they better learn from it. And the reason the northern kingdom fall is here very say it's because they have pride, like verse 9, pride and arrogance of heart, and that's very much to the displeasure of the Lord. And how do they have the pride? And they say, the bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with dressed stone. Fig trees have been felled, but we will replace them with cedars. So it seems that at that time, the northern kingdom already were attacked by enemies. And so bricks have fallen down, city walls have fallen down. But they didn't care. They say, well, they were very defiant. They didn't think as anything from the Lord. And so they say, okay, the walls fallen down, we'll build even stronger walls. And the trees fell down, then we'll build bigger trees. So the Lord has strengthened the Rezin's foes. Now, Rezin was the Syrian king that the northern king, the Israelite king, Pekah was in alliance with. But Rezin did have enemies even within Syria, like the Arameans. They are within his kingdom, like Syria. He has his enemies inside there. And this enemy, like Arameans, verse 12, from the east, and Philistines from the west, they have devoured Israel with open mouth. So they have attacked Israel. And yet for all this, his anger is not turned away. His hand is still upraised. So the Lord is still angry, even with this defeat of the northern tribe by his enemies. The Lord is still angry. His hand still upraised. Now this is a refrain, because these are 4 stanzas as a poetry in Isaiah. So even the first punishment, the Lord was not enough. There's not enough. So we read the second stanza. But the people have not returned to him who struck them, nor have they sought the Lord Almighty. So they didn't repent. They didn't see it as a punishment from the Lord. And so the next thing the Lord would do is cut off from Israel both head and tail, both palm branch and reed in a single day. Now palm trees are tall, so they represent the head, and reed will be relatively low, and so they represent the tail. And verse 15 explains the elders and dignitaries are the head. The prophets who teach lies are the tail. So all the important people will be killed in a short time. Those who guide these people mislead them, and those who are guided are led astray. Verse 17, therefore the Lord will take no pleasure in the young man, nor will he pity the fatherless and widows, for everyone is ungodly and wicked. Every mouth speaks folly. So even though the leaders were wrong, the Lord still holds people responsible for their action, because we are each given our conscience. So if something that's not right, we should not be following. And so, yet for all this, his anger is not turned away. His hand is still upraised. Verse 18, surely wickedness burns like a fire. It consumes briars and thorns. So when people were sinful, like all this wickedness, all these sins, they would consume like briars and thorns. Like these are the wicked people. So when you have sin inside you, it's like, something burns in you. And it says the forest thickets ablaze. The forest thickets is like the society. When everyone sins, it's just a society is just burning with wickedness, so that it rose upward in a column of smoke. But the wrath of the Lord Almighty, the land will be scorched, and people will be fueled for the fire. They will not spare one another. So instead of living lovingly for each other, they would be tearing each other apart. On the right, they will devour, but still be hungry. On the left, they will eat, but not be satisfied. Each will feed on the flesh of their own offspring. Manasseh will feed on Ephraim, and Ephraim on Manasseh. Together they will turn against Judah. So like the alliance with the northern kingdom with Syria would be attacking Judah. Yet for all this, his anger is not turned away, his hand is still upraised. So the Lord has still not satisfied with his anger. Chapter 10. Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people, making widows their prey and robbing the fatherless. So again, we have the unjust courts. Verse 3, what will you do on the day of reckoning when disaster comes from afar? So when the Assyrian attacks, so what would you do? To whom you will run for help? Where will you leave your riches? Verse 4, nothing will remain but to cringe among the captives or fall among the slain. So what are you going to do with all your riches when the Assyrian came and captured you? And yet for all this, his anger is not turned away. His hand is still upraised. So these are the words like that explains why Israel would fall. It's because of the pride and the sin, and that would the really reason why Assyria would come. And so hopefully these words would become example to the southern tribe to pay attention so that they would not commit the same kind of sin like the northern tribes. Verse 5, woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger, in whose hand is the club of my wrath. Now, the Lord like to address the issue of Assyrians because Ahaz was so impressed with this superpower, and he thought the Assyrian or the God of Assyrian is stronger than Yahweh. So here the Lord speaks about Assyrian. He said Assyrian is just the rod of God's anger. It's just a stick in his hand for his wrath. Verse 6, I send him against a godless nation. I dispatch him against a people who anger me, to seize loot and search plunder, and to trample them down like mud in the streets. So it's just an instrument of God, that's all. Verse 7, but this is not what he intends. This is not what he has in mind. His purpose is to destroy, to put an end to many nations. But that's not how Assyria felt. Like he never felt it's something God, being God's instrument. He all just feels of his own. That's all he has in mind, is he wants to destroy many nations. And he said, verse 8, anoint my commanders, all kings, he says. So it's very proud that, just his commanders, they can be compared to the kings of the other nations. So basically, the Assyrian king is saying, I'm the king of kings. It's not carnal, feared like Kakemish. It's not Hamath like Pad, and Samaria like Damascus. Now, these are cities, Carlo, Kakemish. These are cities in Syria, and fortified cities, but they are nothing, to the Assyrian king. And verse 10, as my hand sees the kingdoms of the idols, kingdoms whose images excel those of Jerusalem and Samaria, shall I not deal with Jerusalem and her images as I deal with Samaria and her idols? And he's saying, no, like What kind of idols you think can protect you? All these kingdoms have their idols. They have better idols than Jerusalem and Samaria. And then, so he said, don't believe your gods can protect you. Verse 12. When the Lord has finished all his work against Mount Zion and Jerusalem, he will say, I'll punish the king of Assyria for the willful pride of his heart and the haughty look in his eyes. So God says, like Assyria is only an instrument in his hand. And once he finished using that instrument to accomplish his purposes, then he would deal with the pride of Assyria. Because what did the Assyrian king, he says, like, by the strength of my hand I have done this, and by my wisdom, because I have understanding, I removed the boundaries of nations, I plundered their treasuries. I am mighty one, I subdued their kings. As one reaches into a nest, so my hand searched for the wealth of the nations. So it's just like the bird's nest. It's nothing to him. His hands just reach. And as people gather abandoned eggs, so I gathered all the countries. Not one flapped away or opened a mouth to check. You know, there's not even a mother bird to protect against me, like taking the eggs off the nest. And no one would even protest. Okay, verse 15. Does the axe raise itself above the person who swings it? Now, the Lord asks this question. Like, Assyria is only an axe. But can the axe raise itself without the person that swings it? Or the sword boasts against the one who uses it? As if a rod were to wield the person who lifts it up, or club brandish the one who is not wood. So the club cannot brandish the one who is not wood, the man that's brandishing the club. So the instrument cannot be like talking to the to the one that is using the instrument. So verse 16. Therefore, the Lord Almighty will send a wasting disease upon his sturdy warriors. Unlike his palm, a fire will be kindled like a blazing flame. The light of Israel will become a fire, the Holy One a flame. In a mighty day, it will burn and consume his thorns and his briars. So what the Lord is saying is, one day I'm just going to send a wasting disease. So we know, like, this happened in the time of Hezekiah. So that's about some 30 years later, when the Assyrian army marched against Jerusalem. So the Lord just sent his angel of the Lord, and then overnight he just killed 185,000 of the Assyrian soldiers. And the historian at that time thought there was some kind of, they recorded that incident, and they say it's maybe some kind of a pandemic, rats spreading some kind of poison, and so all the soldiers died. So a wasting disease. The Lord would send a wasting disease upon these warriors. And verse 18, the splendor of his forests and fertile fields, like the thorns and briars are probably like represent like the ordinary soldiers, and then this whole army, splendor of the forests and fertile fields, just like to the, like if you look at the whole army, it's so splendid, fertile, you know, like the forest, and yet just when a sick person waits away, they all fell. 19, and the remaining trees of his forest will be so few. So few will be left. said a child could write them down. So a child can count how many would be left of that mighty enemy. So verse 20, in that day, the remnant of Israel, the survivors of Jacob will no longer rely on him who struck them down, but will truly rely on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. So, and verse 21, a remnant will return, a remnant of Jacob will return to the mighty God. So when these people were exiled, and when they repent, and they would come and trust God, they would be the remnant. So they would rely on him, and no longer they would trust the Lord. So verse 20, no longer rely on him who struck them down, like they would no longer rely on Assyria, like the mighty of the world, but they would trust, they would truly rely on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. They'll come and return to the Lord, and that's the important part. So a remnant will return, a remnant of Jacob will return to the mighty God. Verse 22, though your people will be like the sand by the sea, Israel, only a remnant will return. And yet it's so sad because the judgment has been declared, even though so many in Israel, and yet only a remnant will return, will come to the Lord. Destruction has been decreed, overwhelming and righteous, because it's in accordance with the covenant the Lord has with them. And verse 23, the Lord Almighty will carry out the destruction decreed upon the whole land. Verse 24, therefore, this is what the Lord, the Almighty says, my people who live in Zion, do not be afraid of the Assyrians who beat you with a rod and lift up a club against you as Egypt did. Very soon my anger against you will end, and my wrath will be directed to their destructions. The Lord Almighty will lash them with a whip, and when he struck down, as when he struck down Midian on the rock of Oreb, and he will raise his staff over waters as he did in Egypt. So raise his staff is the parting of the Red Sea and killing of the Egyptian chariots and warriors. Verse 27, in that day their burden will be lifted from your shoulders, their yoke from your neck. The yoke will be broken because you have grown so fat. So do not have to be afraid of them. Their yoke on you will be broken because the Lord will strengthen the nation. The yoke has, like the ox has gone so fat, even the yoke on top of the ox will become broken. Now, verse 28 is a description of how quickly the Assyrian entered Judah to attack them. That probably would be the time of Hezekiah. So they entered Ai. They passed through Migron. They store supplies at Michmash. They go over the pass and say, we will camp overnight at Geba. Ramah trembles. Gibeah of Saul flees. Cry out, daughter, Elim, listen. Nasha, poor Anathoth. Manna is in flight. The people of Gibeon take cover. This day they will halt at naught. They will shake their fists at the mount of daughter Zion, that's at the mount of Jerusalem. Now, this is the commentators say this may not be the actual route. It just shows how quickly, it's a poetic way of showing how quickly or how strong the Assyrian army was. They just, seems to conquer one place and the next, and the next one, and so quickly they came to Jerusalem. And so it's a poetic way of saying how strong the Assyrian army was. Verse 23, see, the Lord Almighty will lop off the boughs with great power. So the lofty tree will be felled, the tall ones will be brought down. So this is talking about the Assyrian army, and then the kings of the Assyria. He'll cut down the forest thickets with an axe. Lebanon will fall before the mighty one. So again, this is another poetic description of how the Lord killed the Assyrian army just overnight. So today's sermon, I have titled it to be Who is in Control? To the people in Isaiah's time, it seems that Assyria is such a superpower, nobody can be against. I mean, every country would fall before Assyria. And yet, God is saying, no, Assyria is only an instrument of my hand, and in due time, like when the purpose of having Assyria is just used to punish the rebellion Israelites, and when that purpose was accomplished, I will deal with the Assyrians with their pride as well. Now, so that's the title of today's sermon, like who is in control? And obviously, God is telling him, even though you look at outwardly, this superpower seems to be so powerful, and yet God is telling us that he is in control, he's in control of history. A little while back, I have a Christian friend who was asking me, and he was saying, what have we done? That all this pandemic, we've been suffering all this, over 2 years now. What did we do to incur all this wrath of God on us? And I said, really, if we think clearly about it, I think there are many with the view that this virus started in the P4 lab in Wuhan, and is probably an accidental leaking out of that lab. And the other thing I also read is very strange. The research, or that kind of research in that lab, was financed by a certain part of the US government, even though it may be doing it in contradiction of the US law. But the whole thing seems to have been to have a human origin, or many believe is of human origin, and so yet it's so we cannot blame God for all this pandemic. It's really human origin, and yet in due time, God is, I believe God allowed all this to come about, and yet in due time, God will also terminate it. So I think the most reason people have the hope in the Omicron variant, that started in South Africa, and many people believe that maybe the end of the pandemic, because the Omicron has the ability to spread very quickly. It's very contagious, and yet at the same time, the symptoms are not that strong, and people easily recover from it. And once you have that, then you have a herd immunity to the virus. Now, who can control? Who controls the mutation of the virus? And I believe that can only be under the hands of the mighty God. He controls it. So he let this to happen. He's all the one that's also be able, like with all these vaccines and so on, and yet, Omicron, it seems to be so easy to break through all these vaccine. So God is, like for the passage today, we can see like God is in control of all the history of all the world events. And with that in mind, I'd like to give a little bit review of the message we received 2 weeks ago from our brother Paul, the prophetic message. You remember Paul was telling us 2022 would be a very blessed year of the Lord. And actually, like when I read the news lately, I already see some things happening. For example, like it's only like this month that we begin to hear that instead of all the say vaccine after vaccine booster, and maybe Israel even gone into the fourth, there's another booster. Now all of a sudden things seem to be changing. Like we already know, like England already decided to like lift all restrictions from the pandemic, and also like the other countries, like for example, I think Ireland, or Denmark, or Holland, and even some of the most restrictive countries like Austria, very harsh, and it's beginning also to change the tones. And even I read from the even BC, I read from the provincial health officer, Bonnie Henry. He said, I think, she says something like the pandemic is something we need to understand and accept, much more like how we manage influenza. Like it's more like flus now. And so like I see like this, year 2021, I see some change already, like to even the pandemic is changing in the 2022. And another article I read, sometimes I like to read from publication called Zero Hedge. And Zero Hedge also says, let me show you. So, seeing red, I don't know, you can see that. Seeing red, I'll just read it to you. Seeing red is the heyday of pandemic stocks over. And so the article was saying, many of the pandemic stocks like Moderna or Zoom, they have fallen greatly in price. So usually the stock market is anticipating, even the stock market is anticipating the fall, the pandemic would be gone soon, or would be at least changed to like something like a flu. At the same time, there's another article that's also last week from Zero Hedge. The title is kind of a surprise to me. It says, majority of millennials, General Zers, want limits on abortion, new poll finds. So millennials are those between maybe 26 to 40. General Zers are those under 25. And these people all of a sudden, they want limits on abortion. And I know last September, like Texas passed a law of whenever you you can detect the heartbeats of babies, then you can no longer do any abortion. They passed that law, and then the other pro-abortion organization come out and say, "Oh, that's okay. You can go out of state, and we can even help you, finance you, to do all these things." But what much better is for the Lord to change the heart of the people, that they would not like want abortion like on demand. So they are beginning to change their heart about the issue of abortion. And so I can even like already sense some things changed. So let me review a little bit of what our brother Paul says 2 weeks ago. He says, you remember he has 4 words for us, right? Deliverance, standby, expectancy, and focus. And I am sensing, there will be deliverance, like even out of this pandemic in this year 2022. And he's so Brother Paul says, even though we may have to go through pain, but there would be personal and national level deliverance for God's people. And you remember he used the picture of Mary, like delivering Jesus, like she cried out in pain for the deliverance. So he say even we may go through pain, but there will be deliverance both on a personal level and on a national level. The second word is stand by. He says it's waiting for Jesus to do. He expects 2022. He said like this would be the tools. Like Brother Paul says, he says this is double blessing. So there are 3 tools, like 2022. So 3 times 2, that would be 3 times the double blessings. And sometimes I listen to Elijah Streams, and Elijah Stream is a program of interviews on prophets. And recently I heard like Mike Thompson, a prophet. He received the word, very much impressed in him. He said, God says, God is going to do a launch in February. And then also another lady, another prophetess, Amanda Grace, she also says, watch out for the month of February. And Mike Thompson was thinking, like, if God is going to do something new, something major in 2022, he would expect it to be starting in January. But somehow God told him it will be in February. It's going to, like there will be a launch. Now, I'm not too sure exactly what that's about, but since we have 2 prophetic persons here verifying the same message, and then we have the 022, and then it just kind of clicks on me. Well, then we 2022, and then there will be another 2, and it all makes sense. Maybe there's something major coming up in the month of February, and which is only a few days ahead of us now. And so the third word is expectancy, and so now we have all, so personally, like I do expect, like things to happen, even like just in February. And the last thing, the last word he has for us was focus. In the storm, he said, to focus on Jesus. Lately, I have canceled a subscription of a news channel that I like very much, because it makes me understand many of current events, make it intelligible to me. But I just have a feeling I should cancel it. And the reason I cancel it is because so that then I will have more time just to talk to the Lord. That's something I learned from the book of Brother Lawrence, The Practice of the Presence of God. It's just, if you want God's presence, all you need is just talk to him like as a good friend. Like him said, as a best friend. Like, you just talk to him, everything that's happening to you, like you're happy, you're not happy, or but try to always express thanks, because everything depends on how you see it. It's half cup empty or half cup full. So you can always try to express, to be thankful to God. But I like to spend more time, like, because once I listen to the current events, very, very attractive. You like want to understand what's happening around the world. But then once you do that, it takes away the time that you focus on the Lord. So I like to. I guess I have canceled that subscription. And so I'd like to use the same word that Brother Paul just used to close his sermons. He said, God loves 2022. And then when he realized that he says all trepidation left him. And God is going to do great things and bless his people with great things. And he'll do great things for his people in 2022. So bless you all with the goodness of the Lord. He's our good Father. He's the good Lord. We just have to trust him and have more of him in 2022. Amen.